This is a FarmDoc Daily webinar. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. Today, we'll talk about South America's crop production under the El Nino influence. Joe Janzen and Joana Colussi, members of the FarmDoc team, will be here to take you through the next hour. If you have questions, be sure to ask them in the chat box. We'll get to those as well. Joana, good morning to you as well to you, Joe. Thank you for being with us today. Can you, Joana, give us a quick outline of what we'll be running through?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. It's great to be here. The FarmDoc team had a really good time in 3 in-person IFES meetings at the beginning of January, and today, almost 1 month later, we will see the recent forecasts and information about the crop season in South America. As you know, it's harvest season in Brazil and Argentina, so it's time to look and see what's going on there. So I will start to provide one update on the influence of El Nino on the crop season. After that, I will talk about soybean and corn production trade in Brazil. Then we'll see the crop prospects in Argentina, another important agriculture player in South America. Afterwards, I will provide an overview of South American production in general. And then Joe Janzen here with us in the studio will talk more about what to expect in prices and supply in the coming months. And finally, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. So let's start. After 3 consecutive growing seasons under La Niña influence, this crop season has been very different with El Nino since last March. Generally speaking, the effects of El Nino are the opposite of the effects of La Niña for South America. During the growing season under El Nino, northern and central Brazil experience reduced rainfall, while southern Brazil and Argentina see increased rainfall. Drought has impacted central Brazil and at the peak of the planting season, especially in Mato Grosso, while southern Brazil has seen too much rain. I was in Brazil in December. More specifically, I was in Rio Grande do Sul, one of Brazil's southernmost states, the blue area on the map. During my stay there, I visited some fields where it has been raining a lot this season, far more than normal. And the main reason is El Nino. El Nino has been present since March 2023. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration models suggest El Nino will continue until March 2024, with a 73% chance of transition to neutral during April-June 2024, followed by La Niña again, as you can see in the blue area on the chart. So let's see El Nino impact on the center-west of Brazil. Dry weather and high temperatures since the beginning of crop season in September forced the replanting of soybeans in some areas, especially in Mato Grosso, the largest soybean and corn producer in Brazil. About 3 million hectares or 7 million acres of soybean were replanted in the center-west states. And we know that replanting is never the same in terms of yields. Also, the replanted areas have impacted the ideal window for planting the second corn season, right after the soybean harvest. On the screen, we can see some pictures taken in November, in December, in Lucas do Rio Verde and Sorriso, key agricultural regions in Brazil. Now, let's see some effects on the harvest season. High temperatures and drought in the center-west have also accelerated the cycle of plants. The soybean harvest was going to start around January 10, but it started in the last week of December in some regions. The average yield in this field, for example, in Campo Novo do Parecis, was around 22 bushels per acre. less than half of the historical average. There are other fields with even lower results. But it's important to say that so far the yields have been very inconsistent in Mato Grosso. There are many regions in very good conditions, like these crops from the Ferrarin group. By the way, we visited this farm last year in Mato Grosso alongside Professors Nick Paulson and Gary Schnitke. This group plants around 50,000 acres of first season soybean and second season corn. It's a big family company. Meanwhile, we see a completely different situation in the southern states. Heavy rainfall has helped soybean and corn in southern Brazil. The forecast is for a full soybean harvest in Rio Grande do Sul so far. Last year, the drought caused by La Niña reduced the soybean harvest by almost half in the state, in Rio Grande do Sul. I took this picture in my state actually one day after Christmas, December 26, when I was there. So now let's move on and look at the most recent forecast for soybeans in Brazil. The numbers were revised because of adverse weather in important growing regions. As of January 27, 90% of the soybean crop was harvested in Brazil, according to the data from the National Supply Company, CONAB. In Mato Grosso, production is expected to drop by 14%, according to the Mato Grosso Institute of Agricultural Economics, IMEA. It's important to say that there is no consensus on this number. There are projections that indicate a reduction much higher than that. AproSoja, for example, the Association of Soybean Farmers in Brazil, they said that the losses will be much higher than that, especially in Mato Grosso. So we'll see. So far, around 20% of the soybean area was harvested in Mato Grosso. The first crops harvested at the end of December and beginning of January had very low yields. But more recently harvested crops, which were planted later, had better results. These fields were helped by the rains at the end of December and beginning of January. But in contrast, southern states such as Rio Grande do Sul, they are expecting a full soybean crop. But of course, like Argentina, southern Brazil, the most important month for soybeans is February. So the weather in the coming weeks will be crucial for to then. So we should continue follow this information. Let's see the forecast for all country. Of course, so far you are talking about Mato Grosso, about Rio Grande do Sul, but it's important to remember that when you are talking about supply, it's important to look the whole picture in all the country. So the forecast was reduced to around 5.5 billion bushels, down 5% from last year. Actually, the range is from 5.7 billion bushels in the best case scenario to 5.3 billion bushels in the worst case scenario. But even with the expected reduction, Brazil will still produce a lot of soybeans this year, as you can see on the screen. And the main factor for that is the increase in planted area over the last decade. Brazilian soybean planted area reached 112 million acres in the current crop season. So that's a record and it's a lot. Now let's see some numbers regarding trade. Last year, Brazil broke its soybean export record. Brazilian soybean exports in 2023 reached a record 3.7 billion bushels. The historical shipments are the result of many factors, such as available supplies, favorable exchange rates, and robust global demand, especially from China. More than 70% of Brazilian soybeans were exported to China last year. That's a lot. It's a very high dependence from the Chinese market. Now, one final slide about soybean production comparing direct costs in Brazil and the United States. Overall, soybean production costs have been higher in Mato Grosso than in central Illinois. The higher cost is mostly due to the high fertilizer and pesticide costs. This has been driven by currency fluctuations, global market volatility because of the war in Ukraine, especially heavy reliance on fertilizer imports in Brazil, and increasing pest pressures in Mato Grosso's more tropical climate. In contrast, soybean seed costs have been higher in Illinois than in Mato Grosso. Seed costs in Brazil are lower and tend to experience less volatility than fertilizer and pesticides, as most of the seed is grown within the country. So now let's move on to corn production and trade prospects in Brazil. The second corn crop will likely be impacted from the problems in the soybean season due to the short planting window. It must be planted within a specific date range to prevent the crop rematuring during the dry season, which starts normally in the middle of April in the center-west of states, in the center-west of Brazil. As January 27, 10% of the second corn crop was planted in Brazil. Currently, more than 70%, actually almost 80% of the corn produced in Brazil is from the second corn crop, the famous safrinha. Brazil first and second crop corn, the safrinha production, are expected to decline by 11% Brazil first crop and 12% for Brazil second crop production. So far, that are the numbers, but of course, we are still in the beginning of the corn season in Brazil for the second crop. So there are many things going on in February, March, and even in April to have a better idea about what we can expect regarding corn production in Brazil this year. The challenge on the soybean crop season, combined with high production costs and relatively unattractive future prices, had led to a 6% reduction in the corn planted area compared to the previous season. Total Brazilian corn acreage is expected to decrease by 52 million acres. Therefore, total corn production is projected to be 4.6 billion bushels, around 10% down compared to the last year. But again, this is the first forecast in the beginning of the corn season. There are many things that will happen from now until the end of this crop season that will be around June and July. As a consequence of this reduction in corn production in Brazil, Brazil is expected to reduce its shipments in the 23-24 market year. The United States lost its position as the world's #1 corn exporter to Brazil in 2023, when China opened its market to Brazilian corn. Actually, China opened its market in November 2022. So in 2023, China became the first partner to Brazil regarding corn. Brazilian soybean exports in 2023 reached a record of 2 billion bushels, a 21% increase from last season's shipments. If that happened, this reduction that are expecting so far, Brazil could return the corn export crowd to the United States in the market year. So we'll see. Let's talk a little bit about corn ethanol production in Brazil. The availability of low-cost corn, especially from the safrinha in the central west of Brazil, has attracted national and international companies to invest in corn ethanol production in Brazil. In contrast to the United States, most Brazilian ethanol is made from sugarcane. Corn ethanol plants began appearing in Brazil in the last decade. Production jumped from 40 million liters to 40.5 billion liters over the last 10 years. It was a really impressive increase. Brazilian corn ethanol could reach almost 6 billion liters in the 23-24 season, an increase of 35% over last season. As a result, corn ethanol is expected to account for almost 20% of all ethanol consumed in the country, up from 14% in the previous season. Currently, there are 21 ethanol plants in Brazil using corn as a feedstock. 9 plants are corn only, while the rest are flex plants producing ethanol from sugarcane and corn. Mato Grosso leads production with 70% of total corn ethanol, followed by Mato Grosso do Sul and Goiás, all of them in the center-west, where the safrinha is concentrated. So just one last slide about corn production in Brazil. The direct costs associated with corn production in Mato Grosso have increased since 2016, consistent with the direct cost of corn production in Illinois. When comparing direct costs on a per bushel of production basis, an average cost advantage has existed for Central Illinois compared with Mato Grosso. This cost advantage is driven by higher per bushel fertilizer costs in Mato Grosso, in addition to higher post-harvest costs of dry and storage in Brazil, especially in Mato Grosso. In contrast, both seed and pesticides costs have been much more similar between Central Illinois and Mato Grosso over the past 9 crop years. So before I move to Argentina, some last information about Brazilian agriculture. During the in-person IFES meetings in Mount Vernon, Peoria, and DeKalb, we received a question often. What is the potential of agriculture expansion in Brazil? Of course, that's not one easy question because there are many factors at play, such as commodity price, international demand, logistics, exchange rate, etc. Most potential new areas in Brazil come from livestock. If you go back and look some numbers regarding the last 2 decades, recovery of degraded pasture helps to increase agriculture areas without deforestation in Brazil. Brazil recovered almost 21 million hectares, equivalent to 52 million acres of degraded pastures from 2000 to 2021, according to the data from the Federal University of Goiás. Looking to the future, a new study from the Brazilian Agriculture Research Corporation and BRAPA, based on the geospatial databases, indicates that the potential for converting 28 million hectares or 69 million acres from pasture into cropland. This number represents a 35% increase compared to the current production area in Brazil, and all that without cutting down a single tree, just converting areas occupied today by pasture. Degraded pasture is the areas that they are using for livestock, for cattle today, but the productivity is very low. So in many cases, some farmers, they prefer rent these areas to have a profitable result, instead of just have livestock there and don't have good profits. This area to be converted in cropland, they just need to receive some lime and fertilization to become productive to agriculture for corn or soybeans. Another often asked question we receive is about the price of cropland in Brazil. Farmland prices have increased by large amounts over the last few years in Brazil, especially in areas used for grain production. In the last 3 years, the average cropland has more than doubled, driven by higher net farm income, low interest rates, and strong investor demand. Southern states stand out as the most expensive farmland in Brazil, with the cropland prices in Paraná similar to the average in Illinois. You can see the green, very green area on the map in the south of Brazil. Paraná's price went up almost 200% in the past few years, from almost $3,000 per acre on average in 2019 to more than $8,000 per acre in 2022. In the same year, the average price for Illinois cropland was estimated at about $90,000 per acre, a record level as well. So like Illinois in the US, Paraná has some of most productive soils in Brazil, and also they have a good infrastructure if you compare with Mato Grosso, even though with Goiás and with the new agriculture frontier in Brazil, the Mato Piba, as you can see, Tocantins, Maranhão, Piauí, and Bahia as well. So the price of cropland there is much lower than in the south of Brazil. So that is all for Brazil. Now let's move on to Argentina.
This is the part where Joana likes to mention that she's going to spend half as much time talking about Argentina as she did talking about Brazil. But we don't hold that against her. It's just some national pride, and that's good stuff.
I'm trying to be fair today with Brazil and Argentina, given not the same time, but almost.
Okay.
Because, I'm just looking the size of crop production in Brazil and Argentina and try to give the equivalent time.
Perfect.
Anyway, so the outlook for the crop season is good for Argentina, despite some areas needing rains over the coming weeks to avoid yield reductions. The crop yields are excellent in the provinces of Córdoba, Santa Fe, and Entre Rios, in the green area on the map. However, farmers in the provinces of Buenos Aires and La Pampa are waiting for more rain in the coming weeks. The forecast of very low precipitation and high temperatures for the upcoming week is a concern for farmers, especially for soybeans, as its yields are defined in February. It's the same than in south of Brazil. They planted later, and they will harvest later than in the center west of Brazil, for example. And after 3 years of serious weather problems caused by La Niña in Argentina, finally the country sees the chance of a full soybean crop again. So, there we go. Look at these two pictures taken in the same area in December 2022 and last December in the Buenos Aires province. These images reflect very well the contrasts between crops in La Niña and El Niño years in Argentina. Thanks to Silvina Cabrini from the National Agriculture Technology Institute, the INTA, for sending us this comparison. So here on the screen, you can see the difference in Pergamino, in December 14, 2022, and in December 6, 2023, and you can see with your eyes the difference between the fields 1 year compared to another year. Now let's look at the most recent forecast for soybeans in Argentina. Argentine farms have increased the soybean planted area by 22% compared to the last year. The Buenos Aires Grain Exchange forecast is that Argentina's soybean production for this crop season will be 1.9 billion bushels, more than double the previous crop. Again, the weather in February will be crucial to confirm these numbers or not. Argentina used to be number 1 in soybean meal and soybean oil exports. However, last year, the drought forced the country to import a record number of soybeans from neighbors Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil to keep its crushing factories open. It was a big challenge for Argentina last year because the crop season was horrible. The outlook for corn production is excellent too, so far. Look at these comparisons between a crop field in December 2022 and another one in December 2023. We can see the difference again in the same area in Pergamino in the province of Buenos Aires. The Rosario Stock Exchange forecast is that Argentina's crop production will be a record of 2.3 will be a record of 2.3 billion bushels, a 160% increase from last year. That's a really good news for Argentina, especially after 3 years under weather problems. This result could be a record for corn production in Argentina. And meanwhile, the new Argentine president, Javier Milei, is pushing for new economic regulations, which he has called a shock therapy to the economy. The libertarian economist Milei takes one of the world's toughest economic challenges. Argentina is facing inflation over 200%. 40% of the population in poverty, and high levels of the national debt. Milei proposed an omnibus bill, a reform package ranging from tax hikes to privatizations. Regarding the exports taxes, the retenciones in Spanish, it's unlikely that the agriculture sector will have a reduction or removal during at least the first year of the new government. The export taxes is one of the Argentinian farmers' primary concerns. Currently, wheat and corn exports are taxed at 12%, while soybean exports are taxed at 33%. This week, there were some discussions around that Milei could increase this export tax, and of course, many farmers complain about that, and Milei gave up of this idea and decided to keep at least the same percentage from the last government. So we'll see. Before I finish and pass to Joy, let's look at the soybean production forecast for South America. A big spike soybean crop in Argentina should help offset the forecasted production decline in Brazil. In addition, Paraguay and Uruguay should increase their production too. So in summary, South America as a whole should have a larger production compared to last year, which is keeping soybean prices low so far. So Joe Janzen here with us in the studio will talk more about what to expect in prices and supply in the coming months. Please, Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Yeah, I think it's really helpful to think about putting this really detailed picture about what's going on in South America, which we know has a major effect on US markets and global markets, to put that in some context. So that's kind of what I'm going to do here in the next few minutes, is just sort of think about how does this fit into sort of the global supply and demand picture, and then what kind of implications might there be for price. And that's going to really sort of be key as we move here into the production planning season for the 2024 crop here in the US Midwest. So this graph just tries to put that change in soybean production and trade into some context. We use the stocks to use ratio here to summarize the global supply and demand picture. Is the market well supplied or not? When stocks to use is high, we typically say that the market is well supplied and prices tends to be low. What we're seeing based on current USDA numbers is a growing global supply of soybeans. Where those stocks are is particularly going to be in South America, as we measure this stocks to use ratio at the end of August, which is typically sort of when the harvest season is more or less wrapped up in South America. We don't tend to have very high U.S. stocks at that point in time, but overall, we see sort of a growing picture. So if you look at the bar on the far right here, we see the global stocks to use picture growing from 18.7% in the 2022-23 crop, mainly on the backs of that much smaller crop that we saw in Argentina in 2022, moving to a stocks to use picture where it's more well supplied, certainly not the highest that we've seen, that big bar in the middle being sort of in the height of the US-China trade war, when stocks grew here in the United States dramatically, but a much more sort of well supplied global soybean market than we have seen in the last 3 years. On the corn side, we see largely the same thing. Again, we're looking at the stocks to use ratio, or sort of how much corn do we have relative to how much we use. That makes these numbers comparable across time. And then we look at that, particularly excluding stocks held in China, as Chinese stocks tend to be a very uncertain quantity, and those stocks tend not to be accessible to the global market. But we see, again, corn stocks growing, mainly on much higher stocks here in the United States, but in part that the stocks here can grow because we're seeing the world being well supplied by corn from both Brazil and Argentina. So 8.2% global stocks to use a year ago. We see that number growing to 9.4%. Even if we do see some reduction in Brazilian corn production, and I think you would have to say that USDA's numbers are maybe lagging some of these private forecasts that Joanna mentioned. Even if we see that, it doesn't sort of change the overall picture here, which is a growing stocks to use ratio and a more well-supplied global corn market. What has that meant for prices? This graph just shows export bids for both the United States and Brazil. These two prices tend to move fairly closely together as importing nations compare bids and look to buy soybeans and corn where they are the cheapest. So they'll compare export bids at U.S. ports, here represented by FOB New Orleans values, with port prices at the various ports in Brazil. The benchmark price that we use here is the port of Paranagua in the south of Brazil. One thing that we've seen in recent weeks, at the far right-hand side of this graph, you'll see the green line dropping well below the blue line. That's export bids in Brazil moving well below U.S. prices, making Brazilian exports much more competitive. If the global market thought that Brazil's wouldn't have much of a soybean crop, that the worst sort of fears about Brazilian soybean production were being realized, I don't think we would have seen this divergence. One of the big stories in the last week in this market has been actually shipments of soybeans from Brazil to the U.S. East Coast. We saw sort of stories about that in the last few days, where these prices have dropped enough that there is an arbitrage trade, a spatial arbitrage trade, moving soybeans from Brazilian ports into markets on the U.S. East Coast. It's actually cheaper to get the beans there than to get them from the Midwest by truck or rail because of these lower export prices coming out of Brazil. For corn, again, the picture is largely the same. Prices are going to be lower. The market looks to be well supplied. We haven't seen sort of big changes in corn export bids, either in the US or in Brazil. In the last few weeks, we've saw the big declines were on the backs of that large Brazilian crop. We saw prices decline in the early half of 2023. That hasn't changed much, but again, it really depends on both sort of what does that much more uncertain safrinha crop look like in Brazil. I think we have a much more sort of uncertainty about corn values relative to soybeans because of the timing of the South American harvest, but we haven't seen sort of as much movement there yet. So with that, I'll turn it back to Joana. She can sort of give you the big picture takeaways, and then we'll move into question and answer.
Thank you, Joe. It's so helpful to have these insights from you about what to expect in terms of the supply, demand, and prices regarding corn and soybeans in the coming months. So a very quick wrap-up about Brazil. So the impact of El Niño on Brazilian agriculture is evident in the current crop season. Recent cuts in soybean production due to a lack of rain in key farmlands, especially in Mato Grosso, the number one in soybean production, corn production in Brazil, mean no more forecast for a record crop in Brazil. Also, delays in the soybean season in the Center-West increase the chance of further problems for the second corn crop, the safrinha, that is planting right now in Brazil. And like I said during the presentation, there is a very tiny window for planting the second corn crop that's in between middle of January and end of the February. After that, the risk to have low yields is very high if the farmers needed to plant in March because of the dry season in Brazil that starts middle April. And so far, like Joe just presented, lower Brazilian production estimates have not increased soybean and corn prices in the international market. Now to wrap up, Argentina, after 3 years of serious weather problems there because of the La Niña, we had 3 years under La Niña. Now we are in El Niño. Argentina finally has the chance for a full crop season, and also under new economic regulations with the new president since last December. There are forecasts for the Argentine soybean crop to more than double in 2024, and the forecast is the corn production will have a record. And a much bigger soybean crop in Argentina should help offset the forecasted production decline in Brazil. About export taxes, the retenciones, it's unlikely that the agriculture sector will have a reduction or removal, at least during the first year of the new government. We know that this money is very important for Argentinian government, so it's so unlikely that they will be able to remove that in a short or medium term. So that's all from me. Todd, thank you so much. Joe and I will be very happy to answer any questions you may have. Please send our questions to us.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much, Joana Colussi, and of course, Joe Janzen are here to answer your questions. Put those into the box, that gray box, that's at the end of the line there on those gray boxes under the GoToWebinar control panel. In the mean space, I will remind you that you are already signed up for this series of webinars. They will include on February 8th, that's next week. This one is at 2 p.m. in the afternoon Central Time as opposed to 11 a.m. This because the USDA WASDE reports are due out that day. The monthly numbers will be the Grain Market Outlook by Joe Janzen and Scott Irwin. So Joe Janzen back next week. They'll also have the
if you want all of our grain market hot takes, we're going to deliver them within 3 hours of the report release. So I encourage everyone to come back next week. I think we will have to put these South American numbers in some more context And we can do that in light of those most recent USDA report numbers as well. So I encourage everyone to come back and join Scott and I for that webinar.
And not only will you have the WASDE or the USDA figures to work with, which are the definitive figures across the planet, but the CONAB numbers are due out at 9 a.m. their time, 6 a.m. Central, our time that same day. So it should be a really good day. You're already signed up for that. And then on the 15th, the following Thursday, Jonathan Koppas will talk about farm policy. On the 22nd, the whole of the IFES series will wrap up with the renewable diesel boom. What does the future look like? This is by Scott Irwin. And then March 5th, which is not a webinar event, but I will point you to both the FarmDoc Daily website and the willag.org website, my own radio station website. The All Day Ag Outlook is coming up at the Beef House in Covington, Indiana. We'd like you to register for that. That's in the upcoming events under webinars and archive on the FarmDoc Daily website. The director for the Center for Sustainable Aviation will be with us on that day to talk about SAF, or Sustainable Aviation Fuel, and GREET. You'll want to be with us for that one. Another series that is now running with the FarmDoc team, this one actually coming along with the farm safety specialist here on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the U of I, is Cultivating Caution, a monthly guide to farm safety and health. Again, sign up for that webinar, the whole series just once a month for the next 11 months, I believe, or thereabouts. So you can sign up for again, farmdocdaily.illinois.edu. Our FarmDoc sponsors, by the way, are from the TIA Center for Farmland Research, Compeer Financial, Corteva Agri-Sciences, Farm Credit Illinois, and the Illinois Corn Growers Association, along with FS Growmark and the Illinois Soybean Association. Our FarmDoc educational partners include the College of Agriculture here on campus, that's ACES, Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences, and the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics. Now let's get to a couple of those questions. We'll begin with this one from Glenn Mayer. He says the Brazil wrap-up slide said Brazilian corn prices are not going up due to crop prospects, but the graph, I believe, showed a recent spike in the Brazilian corn prices. Joe, I saw that as well. Can you talk about it just a little bit, please?
Yeah, there was a little tick up in the data series that I use from, comes to us from a company called Commodities 3. I would view that as maybe sort of not a bad tick, but I don't have a great explanation for that one-day jump in Paranagua bids. I don't read too much into it, other than sometimes we do sort of see, big day-to-day fluctuations that might be sort of like a much more temporary change in prices. I don't think that anything really changes my sort of like medium to long run, as in more than a week to months and into the 24 crop year, where we have to say that all the fundamentals point towards lower prices. Prices in this area where we're much closer to hitting that cost of production level, where we pencil out very, very thin profit margins.
Joe, the next question is an acreage question, I think related to the United States, but you may have a different take on this. Given the price trends, they write, it looks like we may start hitting cost of production here in the U.S. in the next months or so. Which are the first marginal areas which you expect to see stop planting? I have an answer for that question.
Well, maybe let's take this both from a U.S. and a Brazilian perspective. I think we could do both. I think there is sort of, if you look at the crop budget numbers that were published by my colleagues Nick Paulson and Gary Schnicke, we see soybeans penciling out a little bit better than corn here in the United States. So I think we're going to see part of this shift is going to be areas that can grow beans moving towards bean production. We might see some pressure in the Southwest to plant a little bit more sorghum over corn, and then we might see parts of the upper Midwest. Maybe spring wheat pencils out a little bit better in those parts of the world than corn does in the year ahead. Joana, what would you say in terms of trying to answer that question from a Brazilian perspective?
Yeah, I was trying to think, because if you go to corn and soybeans in the center west of Brazil, they plant soybeans in the first season and corn in the second season. The decision that they can do, and maybe to reduce a little bit the soybean areas and go with the cotton. But of course, they can do that in some specific regions in the center west, in Mato Grosso and Mato Piba as well, Maranhão, Tocantins, Piauí, and Bahia. But I don't see a big change. If you look the last year, the corn prices were not attractive. Because of that, they reduced a little bit the area and they increased a little bit soybeans, but I don't see a big change because of that. Maybe some shifts from soybeans to cotton, or reduction some areas of corn when they have a high risk. But most of regions that they have this high risk, for example, regarding weather, they have irrigation, like in the west of Bahia. We can see that more in the south of Brazil, when they must choose between soybeans and corn, because they don't have safrinha in the south of Brazil. There we can see some reduction, especially in corn. But again, just in the next crop season, we are talking about 24, 25. So we have a lot of things going on from now until then.
A lot of time. I think one thing to remember when Joana put up those cost of production numbers, remember that those are direct costs of production, and farmers are going to, in a lot of these areas, particularly, very productive growing areas, like we have here in the United States and in Brazil, are going to be able to cover direct costs. So in the short run, we're going to see some marginal acreage changes. I don't think we're going to see sort of the United States planting 95 million acres of corn this year because of the kinds of cost pressures that we see that the question kind of alluded to. But it's going to be a reduction to a number. I think the numbers that I'm using are in the 91-ish million acres, 92 million acre range, and that's sort of pretty much in line with what people are thinking at this very early stage. For say, U.S. corn acreage going into 2024.
Yeah, and also in Brazil, just to add on one more comment, in the last 2 years, we had a spike in the prices of the fertilizers because of the war in Ukraine, and it's expected this price will decrease. So even though they will have lower prices in international market, they should find lower cost production as well.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on this question just a little bit. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
Because the primary acreage in the United States can fluctuate about 10 million acres or thereabouts. I think from 215 to 225 or 28 or something along those lines. Why does that come in and out of production? And is this marginal cost that we're talking about enough to force that? And does it matter for corn and soybean acres, or mostly for other crops?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I don't think we have a really great handle on. I talked with Scott Irwin, my colleague on the farmdoc team, quite a bit about. We have sort of said, these high prices should be incentivizing a response in terms of total principal crop acres. And we hadn't really seen it, that principal crop acreage number, which was somewhere in the 315 to 320 million acre number for all principal crops. That number had not moved up a lot in spite of the fact that we've had, 3 years of relatively high prices. And so there does sort of seem to be some like rigidity in that number on the upside. What we'll see, I think, I have less confidence because we didn't see much of a reaction on the upside in terms of what happens on the downside when we see lower prices. Will we sort of see the same rigidity in that direction? Will we see sort of, principal crop acres kind of stick around at a pretty relatively fixed level?
Good to know. I was only off by 100 million acres in coming up with the principal crop acreage figure. One last question. This one is a bit off topic, but the person is wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can use AI now to make better decisions in farming, Lots of things to develop over time, I know, he says, but perhaps a topic for a future webinar. I will make note that on the same day as the All-Day Ag Outlook at the Beef House in Covington, Indiana, this question will be addressed at the Ag Tech Conference here on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois. That's at the Ag Tech Summit, so you can look that one up. Joanna, any answer to that question?
Okay, I'll give you my highly speculative take on AI. I think we're seeing a lot of really interesting technologies, like all of the sort of ag tech stuff that has come down the pike in the last 20 years. We've seen, a sort of a precision ag boom, an ag data boom. I think this is like the next sort of step in that process. And I think there will be applications, but this maybe sort of the wildest fever dreams of the ag tech enthusiasts will probably go unrealized. I think we can use AI. I think the one sort of maybe application, we're doing some work with this on the farmdoc team and thinking about how can we take the huge volumes of sort of non-quantitative information, things like text, things like sort of sort of standardized knowledge, and kind of like glean something from that by using AI to process that information. We've thought about doing that on our own work, actually, with things like what we write for FarmDoc Daily, setting AI to work on that to sort of be able to answer questions or pull information out of what the body of knowledge that we've put together as researchers on the FarmDoc team. That's one application, but sort of the specific use case for that and how it's going to make a difference in terms of margins at the farm gate is still a little bit fuzzy, I would have to say. I don't know, Joanna, you want to give us?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you when you talk about AI is the present and the future, especially when you are looking for the crop yields around the globe. The most of the increase of the yields will come from the use of technology, digital technology. Of course, we'll have some opportunities to open new areas like in Brazil and Africa, or maybe in Ukraine, in some areas that we still have available land, but most of the increase of yields in crops will come from the use of technologies. And of course, that includes AI. If you go back 30 years ago when started the precision agriculture after big data, and today the AI is something that you cannot ignore anymore. So it's something for now and for the future for sure. And for agriculture, I'm sure that will play a significant role as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing is to remember is that AI technology will get adopted in concert with all of the other sorts of technologies, like just in terms of sort of very traditional things like plant breeding, hopefully new modes of action for pesticides, things like that. So that it won't be sort of AI sort of driving the bus all by itself. It'll be AI in concert with a basket of agricultural technologies that will play a role in growing global food production in the future.
Our thanks go to Joana Colussi and Joe Janzen, both part of the FarmDoc team here on the Urbana-Champaign campus at the University of Illinois, for making these presentations from the IFES series as a part of this webinar. You can always find it online at farmdocdaily.illinois.edu. Look in the archives for the YouTube. And we appreciate that you are here today. When you leave, make sure you fill out that survey. On behalf of Jim Baltz, who's the technical director and behind the scenes, I'm University of Illinois Extension's farm broadcaster, Todd Gleason. You have a good day.